My son said, "You've lived enough, Mum." Then he took the keys and drove away. And I just stood there, in the silence, in the doorway, holding onto the frame like it could keep me from falling. It took me a moment to realize he wasn't joking. No smile, no wink, just cold eyes. And then the sound of the car starting. Maybe what hurt most wasn't the words, not even the doorstep where I stood frozen. It was the fact that I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I didn't even cry. I simply smiled, a small, tired smile, as if my heart had been preparing for that moment all along. It wasn't always like this. No, not at all. Let me take you back to where it all started. Because before the silence, there was laughter, and before the loneliness, there was love. I married young, at a time when we still wrote letters with pens, and dinner wasn't complete without the whole family at the table. My husband's name was George. He had calloused hands and soft eyes, a man of few words but deep affections. We lived in a small house with white walls and windows that always let in too much sunlight, but we never minded. Life was simple. George worked in the city as a bus driver. I stayed home, kept the house warm and the meals hot. In the evenings we would sit outside with mugs of tea. Sometimes we didn't even speak, just listened to the crickets and the clinking of cups. And then came Matthew, our only child, our son. He was born with dark hair like George and eyes that scanned the world like he already knew too much. He didn't cry much as a baby. People said he was thoughtful, even then. Oh, how we loved him. Everything we did became about that boy. I gave up my sewing to stay close to him. George took extra hours just to save for his schooling. We read him stories every night, stories of dragons, of good kings, and of mothers who would never leave. And as he grew, he became the centre of the world, not just mine. At school, he was clever, polite, the kind of boy teachers loved to teach. Neighbours would say, "He's going to make you proud one day, Edith." And I would smile, because he already had. I used to wait for Matthew by the big oak tree near our lane. He would run into my arms after class, his school bag swinging, asking, "What's for dinner, Mom?" And I would say, "Whatever you want, sweetheart." Oh, how quickly the years pass. I remember the day he left for university. His suitcase was almost as big as he was. He told me not to worry so much, that he'd call every day. And for a while he did. But time has a way of pulling people apart, doesn't it? The phone calls got shorter, less frequent. Sometimes weeks would pass in silence, and I'd sit by the phone, pretending to read a book, just hoping to hear it ring. He visited during holidays, sometimes. When he did come home, he didn't talk much about life, just work, deadlines, and how tired he was. Still, I made his favourite soup every time, even when he didn't eat it. George would pat my hand and say, "He's building a life, Edith. Let him be." And I did. I always did. Then came the day he brought someone home. A girl named Clara. She was beautiful, quiet smile, fancy shoes. She looked out of place in our home, like she belonged in a city apartment where nothing was out of place. I could tell she loved him, though. Maybe not the way I loved George, simple and strong, but in her way. She tried to help in the kitchen once, but didn't know where we kept the spices, didn't recognise the smell of fresh rosemary in the stew. Still, I welcomed her. Because if she loved my son, that was enough for me. When they got married, George and I sat in the first row. I wore my favourite brooch, the one Matthew gave me when he was 10. He had saved up coins for weeks for it. While watching him say his vows, I felt something shift. Not pain, but a letting go. Like watching a bird fly from your windowsill. You don't resent the wind. You just hope the wings are strong enough. Shortly after that, George passed. Sudden heart attack, the doctor said. He went in minutes, no suffering. One moment he was beside me at dinner, then he was gone. And just like that, the house became too quiet, too big. Matthew didn't say much at the funeral. He stood tall, unmoved. I think he didn't know how to grieve in front of others. I didn't ask him to. Then some months later, he said, "You shouldn't be alone, Mum. Come live with us." And I thought it was an answer to my silent prayers. I packed my life into a few boxes, left the house where George and I had laid every brick, and moved into their modern apartment, tall windows, grey walls, and a living room that smelled like expensive candles instead of stew. I told myself I would belong there. That family means adjusting, adapting. I told myself I was still needed. Things were different in their home. Not bad, just different. Everything had a place. The shelves were filled with neat decorations, books untouched, candles never burned, white walls that echoed. They ordered food sometimes, talked about kale, oat milk, and delivery apps I'd never heard of. They had a rhythm, a life that already moved without me, and I tried. Oh, I tried. I'd wake up early, make tea the way Matthew liked it back when he was little. Warm milk, 1 spoon of sugar. "Oh, thanks, Mum," he'd say politely as he scrolled through his phone. Sometimes he forgot it altogether on the counter. Clara always smiled, but it was that polite smile. Soft lips, tight eyes. She never raised her voice, to her credit. But sometimes silence can feel louder than shouting. I'd try to be helpful, fold laundry, sweep the floor, start soup for dinner. But more than once, I heard Clara say under her breath, "She doesn't need to do all that. This isn't her house." The first time she said it, I pretended I didn't hear. The third time it stayed with me. They had a cleaner who came every other week anyway, and meal kits that arrived in perfect little packages. There was no need for an old woman who chopped vegetables slowly and ironed clothes out of habit. Still, I stayed quiet, because noise has never brought me closer to love. I started spending my afternoons by the window, watching cars go by, leaves turning. Clara worked from home, behind her glass desk with coffee and headphones. Matthew came home late, often tired. Sometimes he'd pass behind me and kiss the top of my head. "Hi, Mum. Long day?" And I'd say, "Just quiet. That's all." Every now and then I'd bring up memories, stories from when he was a boy, like the time he tried to build a zip line from our roof to the treehouse. Clara would smile, then lift her phone. Matthew would chuckle, eyes already drifting back to emails. I started to feel invisible. Useful, but invisible. Like the old rocking chair in the corner. Too sentimental to throw out, too out of place to fit in. Then came the small misunderstandings. Once I washed Clara's silk blouse. I didn't know it wasn't meant for the machine. It shrank badly. I offered to replace it. She smiled and said, "Oh, it's okay." But that night I heard her close the bedroom door with a little more force than usual. Another time I rearranged the spice rack, just trying to help. She said nothing, but the next day it was back the way it was. Then came the first real crack. It was one evening after dinner, just the 3 of us at the table. I had made lentil stew with carrot and thyme, the exact way George used to love it. Clara picked at her bowl and said, "It's a little heavy, don't you think?" Soft voice, careful tone. Matthew didn't say much, just nodded. I excused myself to the kitchen, my vision a little blurry, and not from the steam. The next morning, Clara approached me in the hallway. Her voice was gentle, but her words felt sharp. "Listen, Edith, I appreciate you being here, really, but we're trying to keep a routine. We both work long hours and it's been a bit disruptive." I just nodded. Because what else was I going to do? Tell her I felt alone. Tell her I spent hours folding towels just to feel useful. I didn't want to be a burden, but I was starting to realize I already was. So I started stepping back. No more cooking, no more stories, no more reaching. I'd go for walks, long ones, sometimes for hours, even if my knees didn't thank me. Because out there, I could still hear the wind, still see birds land on trees without worrying if I was in the way. One afternoon, I came home to laughter coming from the living room. Clara's parents were over. They sat on the couch sipping wine, talking about a design trip they were planning together. I stood for a moment in the hallway just out of view, and I heard Clara say, "It's just easier when it's just us, you know." Her mother replied, "You did the right thing inviting her in, but maybe it's time to have that conversation." Matthew didn't say anything, not a single word. I turned and walked quietly to my room, closing the door without a sound. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of the kitchen back home, the one with the squeaky drawer, and the stove that George used to fix once a month. I thought about how the floor still had the small scuff from where Matthew rode his tricycle in circles. You don't realise how memories cling to a home until you're away from it. This place, their place, didn't hold any of our history. A few days later, I asked Matthew if he had a moment. We sat on the small balcony, the city buzzing below us. I said, "Do you think I made a mistake moving in?" He looked surprised. "No, Mum, don't say that. We're all adjusting." I nodded, but I could feel it. There was something behind his eyes that wouldn't settle, like words were clawing to come out, but he didn't want to be the one to say them. So I said them for him. "I can go, Matthew, if it'll make things easier." He shook his head, smiled half-heartedly, said, "No, it's not that. You've done a lot for us. You've lived your life." His voice dropped then. He said, "You've lived enough, Mum." And just like that, the moment ended. He got up, grabbed the car keys, said he'd be back later, and he left, just like that. I sat there alone, the city humming, the breeze light, and the words repeated in my head like church bells after a funeral. "You've lived enough." What does that even mean? Was I done now? Had I filled my time, breathed all the breaths I was allowed? I didn't cry. I didn't move. I sat there on their balcony chair, small and metal, trying to frame my entire life in past tense. When the sun began to set that evening, I was still sitting in the same place. The balcony tiles had gone cold under my feet. Down below, people kept moving, cars honking, footsteps echoing, lights blinking to life across the city. And still, I sat there, not ready to go inside, because inside, it wasn't my home. Not really. It was a place I had entered gently, tiptoed around in, tried not to rearrange or disturb, like a guest overstaying her welcome. And deep down, I knew something had cracked, not just in their rhythm, but inside me. For the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine a different ending to this chapter, one where I didn't just wait to be needed, one where I stopped begging for space in their story. Maybe what hurt most wasn't the words, "You've lived enough, Mum." It was realizing my son truly believed it, that my usefulness had a deadline, that motherhood expired with age, that love, once strong and loud, had grown quiet when it was no longer convenient. He didn't say it to be cruel. I know he didn't. But that's the thing about some heartbreaks. They don't come from hatred. They come from distance, from forgetting to remember who someone once was to you. That night, I didn't tell anyone how I felt. The next morning, the quiet continued. Breakfast came and went. They had toast and eggs. I had tea sitting neatly at the edge of the table. Matthew avoided my eyes. Clara was kind, as always, but reserved. There was a careful coldness in their voices, the kind people use when they can't quite bring themselves to have the full conversation. So I had it for them. After the dishes were cleared, I stood in the kitchen and spoke gently. "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time I go back to my own space." Clara looked up, startled. Matthew finally met my eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked. I smiled, not a bright smile, but a peaceful one. The house is still there. It's small, worn, but it remembers me better than these walls do. He didn't argue. Clara started, "Edith, we really didn't want..." I raised my hand kindly. "It's okay. I came because I thought you needed me." A pause, but I forgot to ask if I needed myself. They didn't argue. They didn't insist I stay. And though it stung, that silence was its own permission. So I packed slowly. Not out of sorrow, not entirely, but out of something else. Something like relief. I folded each blouse, each memory, each piece of myself that had hung in this place uncertainly. My boxes were smaller now, lighter. Funny how years of living shrink when no one needs your stories anymore. Before I left, Clara gave me a polite hug. I think she meant well. Matthew drove me to the train station. The car ride was quiet, too quiet for a mother and a son who once built forts out of couch cushions and sang road trip songs off-key. Halfway through, he sighed. "You really don't have to go, Mum." I turned to him and smiled softly. "I know." Another pause. "But I want to." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but the words never came. At the train platform, he carried my single suitcase. No heavy lifting was needed this time, not like when I took him to college years ago, carrying bedsheets, books, a toaster. He waited until the train arrived, then handed me the bag. "Call me when you get in." "I will." I reached up, touched his face gently, like I hadn't in years. "You're still my boy, you know." His eyes filled just a little, but he blinked it back. The train pulled up, and I stepped on without looking back. The ride was long, fields passed by, small towns, familiar air. I stared out the window the entire time, watching trees blur into memory. And somewhere between one small town and the next, I finally exhaled, not just from my lungs, but from my bones. I didn't return to a home filled with welcome signs or warm lights waiting. No one met me at the platform. I took a cab, rode past old roads, cracked fences, neighbours who were probably all new by now, and then I saw it, my house, small, plain, quiet, but mine. The garden was overgrown, the mailbox needed fixing, the paint on the porch was chipped in the same spot it always was, and yet, somehow, it felt like the only place in the world where I could breathe fully. I stepped onto the porch, key in hand. The lock clicked open like it remembered me too, and as I entered, the smell of forgotten warmth filled my nose. Days of George, laughter from the kitchen, the squeak in the floorboard just after the entryway. Still there. I dropped my bag, placed my hand on the wall, and whispered, "Hello again." Those first few days alone were quiet, too quiet. But evening by evening, the silence felt less like a threat and more like company. I'd sit by the window and watch the same oak tree that once shaded Matthew's swing set. I'd drink my tea from the chipped blue mug. And some mornings, just some, I'd wake up with a tiny smile, not even sure why. Not because life was perfect. Not because loneliness had disappeared. But because I had remembered that I was someone long before I ever became someone's mother. I was Edith, a woman who once danced barefoot in the living room, who once wrote love letters with trembling hands, who once rocked a baby boy to sleep every night, whispering stories into the dark. That woman was still here, a little older now, a little softer, but not done. No, not done at all. Some days the quiet still weighed heavy. I'd sit with my tea and find myself staring at the door, half wishing it would open. Just once. Just for him. But it didn't. Not at first. And that's okay. Because healing, I've learned, isn't fast. It's not loud or dramatic. It's made of small moments, like finishing a cup of tea while it's still warm, like hearing an old song on the radio and humming instead of crying. like watering the plants and noticing the first green shoot in weeks. In the stillness of that little house, I slowly found myself again. I watched old movies, sat in George's chair and read books we'd once passed between us. I opened the windows in the evening so the breeze could come through, just the way he liked. Sometimes I would talk to him. You'd laugh at me if you saw me now, George. I'm learning how to be alone again. And on the harder nights, why does being a mother never stop hurting? But then I'd hear the soft creak of our old floorboards, the way they used to sound when Matthew would run in after school, muddy shoes, loud laughs, and the ache would lessen. Just a bit. I started tending the garden again, first just the roses, then the tomatoes, then the small herbs along the porch, rosemary, thyme, a stubborn little mint plant that had somehow survived the years. Every leaf, every bud, reminded me that all things bloom again if you're patient. Hope doesn't come back all at once. It trickles in. One afternoon I went up to the attic, something I hadn't done in years. Boxes, dust, memories. I found Matthew's baby clothes, still folded, his old science fair trophy, a faded drawing of our family, stick figures with big smiles and even bigger hands. I sat on the floor for hours that day, not crying, not exactly, just remembering, allowing myself to feel everything I had buried beneath duty and silence. There was freedom in that. A few weeks later, I baked an apple pie, first one in years, the kind Matthew used to beg for, cinnamon heavy, crust thick and golden. I set it on the windowsill just like before. And for no clear reason, I felt proud. That evening I sat by the fire with a slice to myself and whispered, I haven't lived enough. Not yet. Maybe I was speaking to George, maybe to myself, maybe even to the child in me that had forgotten her own worth. That night I slept peacefully, no memories chasing me, no guilt clinging to the corners of my dreams, just stillness. It was almost 2 months before I heard from Matthew again. A short message on the phone. Hi Mum, just checking in, hope you're okay. I stared at that message for a long time, not out of anger, but because I wanted to make sure the words I returned were calm, kind, and true. So I wrote back, I'm all right, sweetheart. I hope you are too. The house misses your noise. The roses are blooming. He didn't reply right away, but the next morning, there was another message. Would it be all right if I visited next weekend? My heart, oh, that old tired heart, it felt like it skipped a beat. I didn't jump to say yes. I didn't sprint to the kitchen to bake or to scrub the floors. I simply sat, breathed deeply, then replied, yes, that would be nice. When he arrived that Saturday morning, he parked the car on the same gravel spot George used to pull into. He got out slowly. I stood on the porch, arms wrapped around myself. For a moment we just looked at each other. Years, decades, all held in a single silence. Then he stepped forward. That same walk, the one I used to watch from the kitchen window as he came back from school. He hugged me. And this time it wasn't rushed. It wasn't just polite. It was full. Still. Hey, Mom. Hey, love. We sat on the porch that afternoon, just like how George and I used to, with mugs of tea and nothing demanding our attention. He noticed the rose bushes. Wow, you brought them back. They needed tending, like most things. He lowered his eyes then, took a deep breath. I wanted to say, he began, what I said before, about you having lived enough. I didn't mean it like it sounded. I was just tired, stretched thin. I placed my hand over his. I know, Matthew, people say things, tired people say things they don't really feel. He looked at me then, like he was trying to see past the time between us. I didn't know how to juggle everything. Clara, work, my own head. I didn't mean to make you feel unwanted. That word, unwanted, it cut different. But I nodded. I know. We were quiet for a little while after that. Not awkward, just letting things settle. Then he said something that surprised me. You were always home, you know, even when we lived with you. Even when I was older and didn't call enough. You were still home. My eyes filled, but I didn't let the tears fall. And you were always my boy, even when you forgot to come home for soup. He laughed then, really laughed, and something inside both of us lifted. Not everything was fixed in that moment. Relationships don't snap back together like puzzles. But forgiveness isn't a door, it's a path. And that day we took the first few steps again, together. That evening I made his favourite soup, lentils, carrots, just enough time. We sat at the old kitchen table, the one with the scratch from his toy truck when he was 5. He noticed it, ran his finger across it, smiled. Still here? And I replied, some things are worth holding on to. It's been over a year since that evening, since the soup, since the words that mended more than either of us expected. Matthew visits now, not often, but enough. And this time, I don't wait by the window. I live. I fill my days with the small things that make me feel like Edith again. I go to the local market. I talk to the young girl who sells flowers. She reminds me of who I was at 20. I bake, I walk, I write little notes to myself in the margins of recipe books. And some evenings I sit outside with a cup of tea and talk to the wind. Not loud, not desperate, just a quiet conversation with life. And I've learned something. Love doesn't disappear when people forget to show it. It lingers. Like the smell of home-cooked stew in the walls. Like the memory of laughter that lives in worn floorboards. Like the sound of your son's voice when he finally remembers what mum still means. I think a lot now about those words he said. You've lived enough, Mum. And I no longer flinch when I remember them, because maybe to him it was a way of saying, you've done your part. You deserve rest. Maybe it wasn't meant to push me away. Maybe it was his clumsy way of reaching. We all love differently. Some of us use words, some use gestures, some forget, and then remember again too late. But the love, the real kind, it survives both silence and sorrow. I've realised something else too. There's no such thing as having lived enough. As long as there's breath, there's more to feel, more things to taste, more mornings to be surprised by. I'm not done. I'm still learning how to forgive. Still learning how to be proud of my own name. I'm not just mother or wife or guest, just me. And that is still a life worth living. One day maybe I'll go, like George did, quietly, suddenly, with grace. But not yet. Not today. Today I'm going to water the mint, write a letter to a friend, fold warm laundry with music in the background, and maybe, just maybe, slice an apple for pie, because joy lives in the little things, and so do I. If you're a mother or a father, or someone who's loved deeply, and you've felt forgotten, please remember this. You are never too old to matter, never too late to begin again, never finished. Just because someone else doesn't see your pages, you are still here, and that is enough.